everybody. Welcome back. This is After Wine School. I am Keith Wallace. I'm here with the absolutely delightful Alana Zerbe, my partner in crime at the wine school. And today we're going to talk about everyone's favorite subject about wine, which is not being able to drink wine, also known as the American Prohibition.
Yes, Keith. In this episode, we are going to talk about the rise of the FBI and organized crime. We're going to talk about how this completely changed the landscape of California wine, and also what is the legacy of Prohibition? What do we still have to deal with in this country today because of this terrible history?
That's right. Yes. Now, it starts actually with a lot good intentions mixed with some really bad ones. And so you have to think about where America was back in the 1800s. We were drinking an insane amount of booze, largely whiskey. This was all due to us moving westward. As the country became bigger and bigger and bigger, we started drinking more and more and more whiskey and rum. We were drinking like per capita. It was a crazy amount annually, like gallons of hard liquor. So we were hard drinking people. I mean, I think we all know that. The effect of that, especially on the families, was pretty devastating. And so you had one movement, the Temperance movement, seeing that the high level of alcohol consumption, not just with adults, but children as well, needed to be corralled. And so you saw the Temperance moving and saying, look, this is a blight on society. We need to stop hard alcohol. And it was specifically focused on hard alcohol, the whiskeys, the rums, etc. They didn't really talk about cognac or anything fancy, but anyone who was, if you were poor and drinking booze, they didn't want you to do it. But then we also have the suffragettes. And I got to point out, like, that's where my family comes into play with Prohibition, because I have Elizabeth Cady Stanton, was actually my great aunts. She was not liked in my family, by the way. They thought she was very bossy, is what my grandmother told me. I'm like, but she's the famous one. She's the actual feminist. She's amazing. But she was, in the suffragettes, they identified alcohol as being a root cause for violence against women, especially in the household. Now, there's, of course, many other reasons why life was very hard, but you did see alcohol abuse as being this key point for the suffragettes. But then there was the nativists. And the nativists, I think we all can figure out who they were. They were the ones sitting around like, the Scotch and the English saying, yeah, not these damn Germans coming in, drinking all those beer, all those Irish drinking those beer and that whiskey. Oh, they're just terrible people. So they were the nativists, and they really wanted to outlaw anything that had to do with these dirty Europeans, like especially the Germans. You have no idea how hated the Germans were. And of course the Irish, but who doesn't hate the Irish? I'm Scottish-Irish. That's a joke. Just FYI. So, so that's where we were coming into, in the middle of the 1800s. That's where this country was.
And that's so interesting because it is the middle of the 1800s where wine is really beginning to take hold.
That's true.
In this country as well. So, wine began on the East Coast with the early settlers. They did bring Vitis vinifera with them, and the colonists were charged with growing Vitis vinifera. None of them were ever able to do so successfully, but it was a part of their early charter. You were supposed to have wine. But by the mid-19th century, in 1850, it was the state of Maine, the great state of Maine, vacation land, believe it or not, vacation land, which actually decides to outlaw hard alcohol, and 12 states follow.
Oh, yeah. And, of course, this did not go well even in the beginning, because one of the leaders of the Prohibitionist movement in Maine and the mayor of Portland, which was so anti-alcohol, as soon as Prohibition kicks in, he makes sure to get hundreds of barrels of rum for himself for medicinal purposes, literally medicinal purposes. This starts such a riot, such a massive riot, that they call in the troops and they actually fire on the protesters, and at least one person dies over booze. And this is, this is significant. Like the entire city was up in flames over this obvious idiot, trying to actually just keep the booze for himself and none for anybody else. And this is going to be a story. This keeps repeating. This is a story that keeps repeating throughout the next 100 years.
And so at the same time, we have these really strong social undercurrents. Wine is taking hold in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
So, of course, on the East Coast, we have a wine history that dates back to the early colonists. They were attempting to grow Vitis vinifera grapes from the very beginning. They were never successful.
Well, there's so much history in Philadelphia about, of that part of the rule, like the laws were actually to produce wine.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we have.
Oh, yeah.
One of the first commercial wine companies was the PA Vine Co.
That's right.
Right outside of Philadelphia. So there's a lot of great history there.
Yes.
But the point is that by the 19th century, wine was really taking hold. It had gotten started on the West Coast around the Los Angeles area because of the Spanish missionaries. But our greatest wine by the 1850s was actually from Ohio.
Oh, hey, shout out to our people in Ohio.
Go Buccaneers. So this gentleman by the name of Nicholas Longworth, he was a lawyer, a banker, a real estate speculator, but he was also a winemaker. And he was also in the temperance movement.
Very much so, yes.
So he grew the Catawba grape and he made it into America's finest champagne. And in fact, this sparkling wine did take several top honors at wine competitions in Europe. And so his wine was an alternative to hard liquor. So in this world, it could go hand in hand with temperance.
Yes.
Wine was not antithetical to this movement. So that's what was happening in the Midwest. On the West Coast, around the same time, the 1850s, we have the gold rush. And it really is the gold rush that brings an economic boom to Northern California, where folks find beautiful conditions for growing Vitis vinifera. And so here is where you get a lot of plantings of varieties that love a Mediterranean climate: Carignan, Zinfandel, Alicante Bouchette. So this is, by the 19th century, a real precursor to the Napa of today.
Absolutely. You have these ancient grape varieties like Mission grape that were there, brought up from Mexico north by the missionaries. And, some of those wines that, they were actually still being served in places like Paris, all the way up into like the 1980s, 1990s. Some of the best in the world for that style. Sweet, unctuous. But you also had all these vineyards, and you can actually time travel because some of these vineyards still exist. And if you look at them, they just look like these ancient vineyards out of European lore. They're just beautiful. And there is no Cabernet, there is no Merlot. There is a lot of Portuguese, a lot of French, those Southern French grapes and Spanish grapes. Absolutely amazing. Now, but all of this ends. Prohibition starts across the country, 1920. And it doesn't end until 1933. So what you have is a constitutional amendment. Now, mind you, right? A constitutional amendment. That was, I think, the 18th. And then the repeal was the 21st. Is it? Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, thank you. I'm glad. Yep. And this was a huge change. And I mean, just even the idea of losing a right is just stunning.
It really is. So 13 years, 1920 to 1933.
Yeah.
Now, there were many carve-outs. And as I mentioned earlier, wine consumption was not at odds with the temperance movement. So winemakers at this time did not believe that they would be swept up in this prohibition at all.
Oh, yeah. They were assuming that they were going to be making wine. It was going to be fantastic. They were just going to have less competitors in the beer and the whiskey industries.
As it turned out, they had to rely on a few carve-outs. So the carve-outs included sacramental wine, some home use wine, cider was exempted.
Yes, it was, yeah.
And the way that wineries in California survived was mainly through producing sacramental wine, but also selling bricks of grape skins that came with written instructions on how to absolutely avoid fermentation.
Could you imagine today? Like, okay, this is how you do not make meth.
Right.
Yeah, okay, here's everything you need. Here's how not to break bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Stunning. It's brilliant, though. Absolutely brilliant, because you could make wine at home. Like, legally, you can make wine at home. And there's medicinal carve-outs as well. And that's actually for all kinds of alcohol, especially whiskeys. Like, that has continued. It wasn't just actually in Portland that they're having medicinal. And that's literally what the mayor said. It's like, oh, this is for medicinal purposes. I've had some of these medicinal whiskeys, actually. There's actually a place in DC that used to actually, there was a whiskey joint, and you could actually buy, whiskeys from back then. And they had the bottle, it just said, yeah, for medicinal use only. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. Wow. It was a great whiskey. Absolutely fantastic. Cost me a fortune to have 1 ounce, but it was so worth it. I wrote that off the research. But yeah, absolutely fantastic. But, and the bricks were fantastic too. Like, there was such a brilliant way, but to actually, elide the rules really were being broken, not by the wineries. They were not. That's child's play. No. There was such a gaping maw of need, that you have. Like, you all of a sudden lost a right. You can't do it anymore. And you know what happens when you tell anybody? No, anyone who has ever ran into any other human being on the face of the earth knows one thing about people. If you say that you can't have it, they want it. And so what happened here was, of course, everyone wanted alcohol. And there was no place you couldn't get supply, right? You could get bricks or grapes from California. And they literally, by the way, there were the trains from Northern California to the East Coast were massive. And the amount of grapes they brought in, there was actually one person who bought 4 grapes for private use was over 3 tons of grapes just for single use. So this was definitely being...
Oh, the White House cellars were stocked.
Oh, yes.
In 1919, I forget the amount that was spent on alcohol, but the White House was not going to do state dinners without booze. So, yeah.
No, there was a lot of this going around. Yeah. Hypocrisy and prohibition go hand in hand. But who really benefited was organized crime. This is actually when you started seeing organized crime actually become financially stable. Like, this was fantastic because you had to have all kinds of logistics. You had to be able to produce it somehow in the country and then sell it illegally. You had to bring it in from somewhere else. And so, like, this whole thing, this was a massive undertaking that involved so many different steps that were illegal. It was not just 1 or 2 things. You had to bring in massive numbers because the volume of what people wanted was insane. But the other thing that happened was that this illicit activity forced the federal government to do something it had never done, starting policing people's lives. So this is the first time you see the FBI, the police state, actually start to form in America. And you're starting to see people, because of course, where is the alcohol being consumed? It's in people's houses. It's in speakeasies, which are all, of course, these illegal carve-outs of another place, and another, like, whether it's a building or another company or a restaurant, wherever it was, there's all these places that people were wanting to congregate to drink alcohol. And of course, because that's what alcohol is for, it's actually for community. Like, most people weren't just sitting there getting their whiskey and then drinking by themselves. No, they're drinking with other people. That's the whole idea of it. So you saw just a massive change in people's relationship to the government and policing.
So eventually this system does fail. It does crumble. Some things that contributed to the ultimate failure of prohibition are exactly what you were just talking about, the inability to carry out preventing people from drinking. That was just impossible. But also support for the movement had largely been lost by one important sector, and that was by the suffragettes. Because by 1920, women had secured the right to vote in America. And so that social movement decoupled from prohibition.
Isn't that interesting?
It's
It is.
fascinating.
So yeah, and if women had the right to vote just even a couple of years earlier, this probably wouldn't have happened at all. And how it ended up happening even was just so unexpected. Even to the last minute, no one expected prohibition to be complete and full. They just expected it to be alcohol, maybe beer, hard alcohol and beer. And then this all of a sudden, yeah, now, which is amazing. So the resentment of prohibition just grows and grows and grows, not just in one sector, but in many now. Being decoupled from the suffragette movement just lost a lot of your moral compass, right? That force of morality now is kind of dissipated and gone. And there's something else that happens.
Yes.
Because we've lost not just the ability to drink, but also all those jobs, right? There, I mean, breweries in every town, neighborhoods, bars in every neighborhood, wineries, distilleries. These were jobs. These were good jobs that now don't exist anymore. And so this is going to get 10x worse because now we're getting into the depression, the beginning stage of the depression. And this just totally destroys people's desire or anyone's desire to have prohibition, because the poorer you are, the more you want to drink. First of all, right? Just that fact alone, but also just the jobs are missing. Now, this just seems to be just pushing a rock uphill for no apparent reason. And it's starting to get ugly because this, you already have the ugliness of the rise of crime and of violent crime and organized crime. Now you have a whole new voting bloc. And now you have the depression. All of this is turning into a tinderbox. And who knows what could happen at this stage. People were very concerned. This was a point in time that America could have broken significantly from what it becomes. Yeah, and with that happy note, I'm going to leave it to you.
Yeah, so a snapshot of California, 1930, post-Prohibition. The state had begun with over 700 wineries. It is left with a little over 100. And we also now have left the states to regulate in a patchwork way alcohol. Yeah. So there's just this huge vacuum. And so it's a really fraught environment for winemakers.
Yeah. So, okay. So here we are. It's the end of Prohibition. And politicians are looking at, like, what do we do? Well, they look on the horizon and they look to Europe. And what things is happening in Europe, especially even in England, a lot of the taverns were actually owned and operated by breweries. And some were by distilleries. And what they saw, they said that, well, we don't want that. They don't want to cede that to large companies. And the breweries were the largest, most economically viable companies in Europe. They looked at that and they're like, we don't want that. What we want is to maintain control. And in fact, let's give it the control to the states instead. And let's make sure that they have a 3-tier system to break the producers' chokehold on the alcohol trade. So that's what they did. And so there's some good about this. So let's describe this. So what producers, they can't actually own taverns or restaurants, wine shops. They can't do that because there actually has to be a middle person. So you have ownership of a winery or import company bringing wine to the United States, and then you have a distributor. And only the distributors can actually take that wine and take it to the marketplace. And though that marketplace is either going to be a wine shop, grocery store, or a restaurant where a consumer will buy the wine. That's it. There has to be these 3 tiers: supplier, distributor, and retail. That's it.
And that's interesting. So it really is creating a moat around the producer.
Yes.
Like that's the goal of this system.
It was always about that. It was always to keep them in check. And it really did work. And I don't honestly at that stage, because we were, the American industry was destroyed. There was no power. There's no major brewers or wineries left. They were all broken. So this was interesting because then it was sent out to all the different states. So not only do you have this 3-tier system, each state built it differently. So that now you have a regulatory patchwork, as you said, which was incredibly complicated. And it's so complicated, even to this day, that shipping compliance is an entire business in the industry. Like, If you are a winery, you actually have to have a company or a person who's just, their only job is to deal with compliance of shipping or of delivering wine. Like, that's a whole massively complex system that there's entire actually law firms that just are devoted to that one part of the law.
Yeah, miss me with that. Miss me with that.
Oh my. It is the most boring compliance trade. Oh my God.
But I think Prohibition also reworked not just the way wine is distributed, but the way Americans think about wine.
That's true.
So it's now in a moral framework.
Oh yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times I have met people, religious people or some people in my own family, who will say, oh, I don't have a problem with you encouraging people to drink wine. And as soon as somebody says that, I'm like, oh, I think you have a problem with it.
Yeah.
So there's a morality to consumption of alcohol, and that includes wine. We talk about it on a personal level, on a nationwide level. We do put wine along with firearms and tobacco and other deleterious things that basically say to a person, you individual should not be trusted with this. This is a controlled substance. This is something that someone else has to oversee your use of. So this is diametrically opposite from the European idol of, well, this is part of my cuisine. This is part of my cultural heritage. This is food in a glass. This is the complete opposite of that. And so it reworked not just the regulatory framework, not just the infrastructure of how wine gets to the consumer, but how the consumer themselves processes what is wine and what does it mean to consume wine.
It's crazy. So like, I got my family, it wasn't the Stantons, the Phillips, the Edwards, the Wallaces. They were all part of the temperance movement. Like, my family are good old fashioned New England Baptists, and they were anti-alcohol. The fact that my grandparents went to their grave not knowing what I did for a living, it was the biggest secret in my family, outside of the fact that one of my cousins got married and then divorced, and the other one smoked cigarettes. So yeah, that was it. It was to such an extreme that they would not even use red wine vinegar in anything because it was made from alcohol. They wouldn't use malt vinegar because it was made from alcohol. It was amazing when I started working at 14 as a dishwasher that people actually drank. This was fantastic information. It was information I used all too well when I was cleaning after hours, but another story. Now, this legacy is so huge, actually. Even how we fund science has been under this impression in the United States. And this is, mind you, this is the United States only. Our science is focused on abuse and alcoholism. So one of the only funders for scientific research into alcohol is the National Institute of Alcohol and Alcoholism, or Alcohol Abuse.
Alcohol abuse and alcoholism.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Now, what they do, they need to say, I'm not a fan. So if you're a researcher and you want to get funded, this is one of the only avenues you have for federal money. But it's a little bit darker than that. If you're publishing in a medical journal, any of the medical journals in America, you will get cited much more often if you write an article about something that alcohol does that's damaging to an individual. You will also get published much more often. If you do the opposite, say, oh, alcohol has all these problems and causes these issues, your route towards publishing is a lot simpler. And you also just have this assumption in America by researchers that alcohol is a problem to be solved. And all your research comes from that point of view, which is why we do see like this new rise of prohibitionist ideas coming out right now. Like, you're seeing it, you see it in the scientific literature, and it keeps on coming up. And because it's actually such bad science, oftentimes it gets cut down. So we're seeing that fight happening right now within the federal government. We're seeing it throughout universities. But fortunately, a lot of that science gets knocked down as soon as it pops up. But if you're anti-alcohol, you're going to be better funded, largely because or just for the honest fact that when you're researching, people want to deleterious effects of a substance, not a benefit. That's not what they're looking for. So there's all kinds of issues with how we research alcohol today. It's just a bias that I think people don't realize is out there. The things that we don't talk about and the assumptions we make as a culture, it all comes down to those 13 years. Alcohol is bad. You would never deny a right if it was something good.
Some things that are lingering today when folks come to Philadelphia for the first time. If they're new, they're in a new graduate program and they're excited to be into the city.
Yeah.
They quickly become acquainted with the state liquor control board and its wine and spirit stores. Well, okay, I'll go there and maybe I can get my vodka. They can pick up a bottle of wine, but what if I want beer? Oh, you have to go someplace else for beer. I grew up in Pennsylvania when we still had blue laws. There is a county in New Jersey and other places where they are dry. There is still prohibition in place on the county level. So you come up against these laws in some instances, but I think what's more interesting is that subtle psychological shift that we have as Americans that we don't even realize.
Oh, it is so subtle. It's pernicious. And it's the fact that, we'll say it's healthy to eat a salad, but unhealthy to have wine if you're pregnant. But in France, they'll say, don't eat the salad, but have the glass of wine. So there's a very distinct difference in viewpoint, and it comes down to prohibition. And that lingering thing, we don't even know it's there. This is what happens. It's just a part of our existence here in the United States. And the blue laws, there are states where up until very recently, you had to be a member of a club even to have alcohol served to you in public. Or cocktails couldn't be served except for they had to come from very specific little bottles. That I thought only came in airplanes, but apparently they just use them to make cocktails with. I grew up in Massachusetts, and alcohol was not sold on Sundays, but it was in New Hampshire. So we went to their package stores in New Hampshire to get it. And we called it the Packy Run. Everyone knew what a Packy Run was. Let's do a Packy Run. Mm-hmm. So there's some grapes just that we don't even have anymore. We don't even know what we've lost. That diversity is some of the things that I'm the most sad about. Yes, we have plenty of Napa Cap, but where's all the Charbonneau? Where is all the Carmenere? Where is all that Petit Verdot? Where is all that Touriga Nacional? Where is all that wonderful wine? Where's all that culture? Where is it gone? It's forever gone. It's dead history to us. And that breaks my heart. Breaks my heart.
And there was a lot of wine knowledge that was lost.
Oh, God. Oh, that's insane amounts. Insane, yes.
When something lasts for 13 years... it really does seem when you're in the middle of that could go on forever. It was meant to be permanent. It was a constitutional amendment. And so there was just an immense amount of institutional history and knowledge that was lost. And that is what made the Judgment of Paris actually such a seminal landmark event, because it was proof that winemakers had regained ground, but they were starting from scratch in the 1930s. They were beginning with nothing. So that was remarkable. I think also because of Prohibition, we don't have sort of a united national appreciation and understanding of wine as a national beverage. It's very regional and lots of different divisions and ideas in wine. And I think that that's a real loss as well. We all could have been united in America's champagne.
Right.
Coming
Thank you.
From
Yes.
Ohio.
Yes.
And instead we sort of have the one big player, California, and everybody else is working hard, but it's just a completely different landscape where there are real big power players and then other places that just don't share in the same pride for winemaking.
You're right about that. And the loss of history is so profound. It wasn't just that we lost how to make wine. We just lost the understanding of how to drink wine. When you look at what people were drinking after Prohibition in the 40s and 50s, it was just sweet, nasty wines. They were fortified. They were sweet. We went back so far. And it took until the 70s and then the 80s, really, when Americans started drinking wine again. But it was no longer something that people did with their families. It was something that became elitist, and there was a specific kind of person who drank wine. It wasn't everybody anymore, because it used to be everybody.
Yes.
You see this in places like California. When I talk to people from California, they have an idea of themselves that's very different about wine than someone on the East Coast. And the whole movement of local wineries, especially in Virginia, where wine production is just gangbusters, in New York, Pennsylvania, a little bit even in Vermont, of all places,
Texas,
and Arizona. But this patchwork is slowly forming again. And that's one thing that is very hopeful. And this is why wine schools actually exist now, because that lost knowledge, we have to knit it back, and we're slowly knitting it back. And this work is only started really happening in the early aughts. You started seeing actually wine schools popping up across the country. Why at that time? Because people want their history back. People want to know that the wines we used to make. They want to have some of those wines. This is the moment. This is why we're in wine school. So, folks, it was fantastic having you here. By all means, if you are interested in the wine industry, if you love what you heard today, of course, like and subscribe. Please do. But also, earn your sommelier certification. Go to the National Wine School, wineschool.us. Or you can also come to us in Philly.
Yes, visit us if you're in the Philadelphia area at the Wine School of Philadelphia, where both of us teach full-time. Next time, we'll be talking about the rise of California wine. So join us again soon. Thank you.
Cheers, folks.